Have you ever thought about if what a consumer is willing to pay for something, for a good or service, that it depends on its motivations, or if we can influence a customer? And what's more powerful, the pain of losing or the pleasure of winning? Well, to these and many other questions, our next speakers will answer. Felipe Romero, he's a psychologist, and for more than 20 years, he's been studying the market trends. He's partner of the Cocktail, where they use behavioral economics to understand the process of the decision taking by the client. He's going to talk about how, in business, the so-called cognitive biases work, and he's going to experiment with you. You have the floor, Mr. Romero.
Uy, verás tú. Esto siempre la acabo.
I'm always confused. Well, Felipe Romero, first of all, thank you, DEC, for organizing this event, for inviting us. I understand that the cocktail, you know it, we are briefly a company devoted to improve the customer experience for the organizations we work with and for the employees. And we work with 5 tools: data, technology, design, business view, and knowledge of the consumer. This is what we do. So, cognitive biases. 20-something years ago, who would talk when I was studying psychology and I was working on cognitive psychology, who would tell me that everything I was studying about all these things that were starting to appear, that someday they will be used in businesses? And it seems that it's been the case. And that's what we'll be talking about.
Me queda también una cuestión, y es que
There's something else from that period of my time. I had different mental defaults that appeared after the experience we did. And one of these defaults is that I'm passionate about psycholinguistics. And there is specificity in psycholinguistics I love, which is etymology. What is etymology? Is that discipline that studies how terms evolve in their meanings, how they migrate between linguistic communities, and how they evolve in time. So going back to my student era, I had to start from something, and I was gonna make you do the cat, but you've already been a bear, so I'm not gonna take that dynamics, but I'm gonna start from the perspective of etymology. What's a bias? Well, many years ago, bias in English, is a word that when the French gave things to the Englishmen and they helped them, they used this term. And it meant curve, deviation, twisting, something that deviated from what it was supposed to do. And then the word starts to appear in text in the 60s of different domains. The bowling and the exercise of putting different ways in the bowl so that we can launch and the ball would deviate and won't go straight. And it was also used in artillery. In order to launch projectiles, they did put some weights to have different routes, and that the projectile will be biased from its trajectory. And they are one of the founders of experimenting in science. They would load the balls with different weights. They would play with different routes to see the trajectory of the missiles or the balls they would launch. If we go to 1570, biases, the word bias appears in the legal terms. There are judges that have a lateral tendency, and they condemn some and not others. And that's also when bias appears in the legal world. In 1960, 1970, we get to bias in psychology, in scientific and experimental psychology. Kalman and Tursky are the first ones using bias in psychology. And I could say that I come from psychology. It's so nice that the psychology gets a Nobel Prize because of economic psychology. And if you've ever worked with consumers, we're supported, psychologists, with the fact that things are happening that classical theory say shouldn't happen. And Kahneman, the psychologist, that is the origin of this discipline of the studying the process of taking decisions, he says that the consumer is rational. He says that consumers are not rational. And when we look at consumers, we see it every day, that deviation, that bias. So with this term, and there are two ideas I'd like to highlight. First, they happen below the threshold of consciousness. This deviation is not perceived consciously. Therefore, that limits or modifies the techniques to gather information of consumers, and it has got a specificity because they're systematics. If these errors were not systematic, we would not be able to study them and intervene. So, as these cognitive errors that are systematic, we can study them based on the experimental methodology. And this is a word I'm going to be using a lot in the world of experimentation. So in order to see how cognitive psychology works, I'm going to make an experiment with you. The room is slightly twisted. Well, from here to your right, from here to your left, you're going to be group A. So you're group A, you close your eyes. Group B, open eyes. Group A, please, don't cheat. Don't cheat, Nanes, close your eyes, come on. Don't cheat. If you know the experiment, please help me out here. So what's the experiment? Group B, read the screen. Group A, close your eyes. I'm watching you. Group B, are you reading? So please answer exactly to this question. Please write down, get your number, and now let's go to Group B.
Dinámica.
And we swap it. Group A opens eyes. B, close your eyes. It is a bit twisted, please, but let's see if you can read it. Group A has designed a microinsurance which protects against accidents and corporal body injuries that can suffer when they carry out different sports activities. These microinsurance can be hired 24 hours before starting a sports activity, and the coverage is lasting for 3 hours. What do you think is the price of this microinsurance? Less than 70, more than 70. So what is the adequate price for this microinsurance? Give an accurate figure, please. Write it down. So you can all open your eyes. I'm sure you haven't fallen asleep because you've done the grizzly bear hug, so you're not falling asleep. This is the result of the experiment. The outcome shows you who is between 0 and 10 euros. 0 to 10. 11 to 20. Between 21 and 40. I'm sure something's happening in the room. There is a clear trend. Yep, you can go down now. To give lower values here on this experimental group. What have we done? This is behavioral economics, cognitive bias, and this is trying to show the hidden weight of these balls in an experimental method. We present the same stimuli, but that's having a small variable reflecting it on the request, thus provoking a change, and this has to do with a price estimate. I presented the same, but the question is an intermediate reference, something that has to do with the prices more or less than 10, more or less than 70. What happened is the anchor cognitive bias introducing an intermediate value modifies the price estimation. This is well known in the field of experimental psychology, which, by the way, we are very pleased because this experimental psychology has already identified 70 biases, which allow customer experience professionals to bring this to the business world instead of the academic world purely. With you, but of general consumers as well. What we did with 1,500 Spanish consumers, these are data from Spain, low anchoring, 10.10. Another reference, 70. So they tended to go down to 32.5. And the control group, nothing is presented. You don't present this placebo effect. And there's a huge difference in these price estimates between all of them. What we see is that the bias has an impact on our price estimation, a transition between experimental, academic. What is the market price of this product? This was launched by Evo Bank at €1. What happens with the anchor effect? It works really well in those markets where they are innovative and they have innovative products. It makes sense when you have a fully saturated market. This anchor effect has, doubled these variables. What happens with this? The assessments do not depend only on the preferences and attitudes. This is what we've always developed, but they depend on how they are framed. The left part is what we always knew: preferences, attitudes, beliefs. Behavioral economics says it really depends and try and identify how a certain product is framed. How can we apply cognitive bias in customer experience? First and foremost, we must understand that we always based ourselves on this premise, on preferences, whereas we tend to forget this other part that has to do with how we frame and present a stimuli. What have we done in customer experience? This is a very valuable exercise where we identify the touch points and emotions. We believe there is a possibility to say, okay, apart from emotions, let's try and identify the cognitive bias that is affecting each of these emotions and journeys. With this availability, 50, 60, 70 cognitive bias that have been identified by academic literature, we can combine them with the customer journeys and see what is happening. The challenge is, okay, the cognitive bias is something that is facing individuals, but we as an organization, we need to propose an architecture so the decision-making process flows accordingly. And I'm going to quickly tell you two other cognitive biases applied in real examples. Considerations, for instance, attribute priming with a premise in the field of consumers know-how. Their preferences have been previously built. Is this always true? Let's make another example. 1,500 consumers in Spain and split into groups. They are homogeneous groups. It's the only way to carry out an experiment and benchmarking among themselves. So group 1, no framework. So if you were going to buy a new smartphone, what are the options? Would you choose if this is information about memory, battery, and the quality of the camera? And the second group, and that's equally homogeneous, is presented the same question, but also an intermediate question. Are you pleased with the quality of pictures in your current mobile phone? Well, the outcome should be identical. What happens is that this is not true. Just the fact of introducing these previous reflection, it modifies preferences and it gives greater importance to alternatives that have to do with the quality of the mobile phone. And if you're experts in marketing and customer experience, this is something you know really well, introducing a new attribute in their thinking or rationale. And this is the attribute priming. We have an awful lot of bias that are available on literature that are useful for CX. Another one in the purchase process, loss aversion. What is more powerful, the pleasure of winning or the pain of losing? This is a question you've always had. In science, is twice as much powerful the fear of losing than the possibility to win. This is an experiment with different users representative of the Spanish population. Imagine that you're buying a new mobile device for 400 euros and you can add an insurance, and this will cost you 425 euros. So what you add on this terminal, the other group under the same conditions, 425. And they say, do you want to give up to this insurance, 25 euros deduction? The result is the same, okay? There is a 5-point deviation. Imagine the 5% impact in the decision-making process in terms of availability or willingness to hire the insurance again. This is a loss aversion. As I said, there are 50 or 60 biases that point at the customer experience within a customer journey. I'm about to finish now, but before I do so, let me take another step backwards. What is customer experience in Spain? 5 or 6 years in massive growth. The nature of this event shows you this. There are professionals, trainers, and there are many challenges in training, how we were mapping them. So it is really a very significant challenge where we've identified a great improvement as suppliers of customer experience. There is a DEC report that shows us that in the past few years in Spain, the customer experience has improved with the passing of time. Well, this is all true, but two things happen. A, when all of them improve, it is very difficult to be the differential factor. If everyone is improving their CX, it is more and more difficult to be differentiated. But most importantly, we all feel that when we take a look at our customer journey, that we've always improved. There are certain areas still where you haven't improved anything after lots of focus groups, ethnographic sessions, technical solutions, and all of a sudden something is not quite working. What is our value proposition? What is our reflection about behavioral economics in customer experience? And we have an opportunity. So all the organizations have undergone that process. And these are our journeys. And let's audit our processes once again, trying to identify everything where conventional research hasn't solved it, to analyze the presence of cognitive bias at all the times, trying to explain why this is not quite working. Let's design a new architecture based on behavioral economics. And once again, we have to test obsessively with these experimental models that we've touched upon. And at the end of the day, our suggestion is behavioral economics within customer experience professionals is yet another tool that can help us take another step forward in our journeys. Instead of being feelings designers, we will be decisions architecture, and that's all I wanted to mention. Thank you very much indeed.